Dan Beaver. Hey, Dan.
How's it going?
Dan, we're doing terrific, and Dan Beaver is the fantasy racing guru. I love talking to gurus. Dan,
Like
he's a fantasy racing guru for NASCAR.com and YahooSports.com. Stop. And Dan is we're fortunate to have Dan as a regular contributor here on Pit Row, and we're going to talk about Talladega and the wild card that Talladega is in this race in a minute. But I got to ask Dan a little bit. I kind of gave him a heads up earlier today that we were going to ask him a little bit about the chase and whether he thought, because I had read your earlier, I kind of snuck a peek at your fast lap question about whether this was a three-man race for the chase. And Dan, do you think that this chase thing is down to three guys, or are we still wide open, at least somewhat more than three?
It's wide open until after this weekend.
Yeah.
I thought it was somewhat striking that folks are considering it as a three-man chase, and honestly, I don't know which three men they're thinking about.
It's three men and Jeff Gordon. I'm assuming the top three in points, but there are three drivers that have swept the top 10. Three of the chasers have swept the top 10. There are two of the drivers in the top three in points, plus Clint Boyer. Hamlin has not swept the top 10, but he's still considered a strong threat. And it's interesting to note that only three drivers finished in the top 10 at Talladega last year. Of those, only one of them was a serious contender at the end of the season. So there's going to be a separation going to come after this race, and at that point, I think you can start to write people off. I don't know that you can decide which one is going to be the favorite even after this race. It's going to take a little bit longer, and everybody wants to apply the past to the current chase, and that's just not doable right at the moment.
I agree with you. So we'll let this ride, and we'll enjoy the ride, which is what sports is supposed to be all about. We all try to figure out what's going to happen at the end before the end, and I've never really understood that myself. I kind of enjoy the watching the games. And speaking of games, you're on the rotation this week, and you always get the easy tracks. You get Talladega to predict. So I think last time you hit Bristol. So you get these easy things. So, Dan, tell us, give us your wisdom on who's going to win at Talladega.
Well, Talladega is easy. Anybody can win. There are no good picks. There are no bad picks.
You do sound like Bill Clark now.
You do the best you can. You forget about who you picked. You turn the TV on. You take a Xanax and you watch.
Yeah, sit on the edge of your seat. This is the one race I think every year, as long as it is, this is the races at Talladega. I really enjoy watching. They're races that I can sit and actually watch the whole race and not zone out. Almost on the edge of my seat.
Plus, it's a Lions bye week, so that helps for you, too.
That helps this week. But even if that were not the case, I can sit there and watch. It's the tension never lets up to me on these races, and this is the fan coming out. It's not the fantasy racer, but I am always curious about how guys like you and Eric and Ryan Rance, how you predict a race at Talladega, because looking at for the loop data, for example, there's like nobody that jumps out at you anymore. 5 or 6 years ago it was you'd pick a DEI car and you go to sleep on it, but you can't do that anymore, can you?
No, you can't. I have a formula that works for a lot of tracks. Nothing is predictive about Talladega.
Yeah.
The best you can hope for is that there is a predominance of stats that kind of point you in a direction. Then the field turns sideways in front of the driver that should do well, and all those numbers go fly out the window. But because streaks are so difficult to come by on the plate tracks combined and at Talladega in particular, anybody who's able to string together strong runs has to make their way to the top of the list. You've got Clint Boyer, who doesn't run particularly well at Daytona, but he comes into this race with a 5-race top 7 streak, 2 of which are victories, another one of which is a second-place finish. And you realize that there's something more going on than we really can predict. He's found a way to stay out of trouble. He's not necessarily the most aggressive driver in the field. He's certainly not the most conservative driver in the field. And a driver who can avoid catastrophe more often than not has to be appealing at a track like this. Another driver that you're not going to think about most weeks, he's actually one of my favorites this week, and I haven't said that, I think, all year, would be Jeff Burton, who comes into the weekend with a perfect streak of top 10s on the plate tracks this year. 5th at Daytona, or 5th in the 500, 2nd in the Coke Zero 400, 10th at Talladega, and 2nd at Talladega last year. He's not flashy. He's certainly not on very many people's radar screens. If he can stay out of trouble again, he's probably going to get a top 10, and he could be one of those great differentiators for something like the Yahoo game or even the NASCAR Fantasy Live game, where his salary cap is extremely modest.
Yeah, he's one of the guys, I think, if I looked at the Loop stats this week, that, if I'm not mistaken, he's one of the top 1 or 2 in overall driver ranking, at least, at Talladega.
Yep.
Yeah. We just got done talking to David Reagan, who's running for Front Row Motorsports, and Reagan also has good numbers at Talladega. And if you're looking at, if you're talking about drivers with consistency, would you look at somebody? I mean, Reagan's like 29th in points or something. I mean, he's not a threat really to, you wouldn't think to win the race, but is he a guy that if you're looking at one of those from the salary cap game or a Yahoo game, would you take a flyer on somebody like that has been really good relative to other drivers at the plate tracks?
His use in something like the Yahoo game is somewhat limited because, yes, he's a good pick. He finished 7th in the Aaron's 499. He won last year in different equipment at Daytona. He's got the skill to get there. But the same thing can be said about so many drivers and so many drivers in Group C that you would prefer to have someone with a slightly longer history of success, if possible. You can roll the dice on one driver. You can roll the dice on a couple of drivers, perhaps. But in the Yahoo game this week, I think you're more likely to roll the dice on a Group A driver, where the differences statistically between them is so minimal that it would encourage you to not be too far out of the norm down in Group C or in Group B. And this week we've got Hornish, who is still running strong, could still run well. We've got Trevor Bayne, who you can say great things about. You've got Michael Waltrip, you can say great things about. So I wouldn't say anything bad about Reagan. I certainly wouldn't dissuade anyone from using him, but probably not going to be one of the top 3 or 4 handicaps this week. I would say that's going to go to Waltrip, Bayne, Hornish, and even Eric Almirola. The team's strong. If he stays out of trouble, Ambrose had some strong finishes at the beginning of his career, so he has a teammate. Reagan's going to have to hook up with someone that he's probably not comfortable drafting with or hasn't been comfortable drafting with in the past, and that could cost him at the end.
All right, well, we've got about a minute left, Dan, so put you on the spot. Give us a quick recap of what your Yahoo team will look like, and maybe give us a pick to win this week at Talladega.
Keselowski will be my top driver in Group A. My 2 top B drivers, I already mentioned, that's going to be Boyer and Burton. I think it's a pick-em in Group C between those guys that I just mentioned. So far as the winner, it's going to be the person who crosses the start-finish line first.
Yeah, well, we don't allow that as a pick, unfortunately.
Good try, though.
If I've got to go out on a limb, I think Boyer will be pushed at the end, and Boyer will be the guy who wins.
Do you have any inclination at all to pick Dale Earnhardt Jr.? here? Is that whole romance with the plate tracks over with for Junior?
No, but I think the other two guys have shown more consistency lately.
Yeah.
And I think Hendrick Motorsports likes to play conservatively. It bit them badly last year in this race when they all got shuffled out of the lead draft there at the end, and they hadn't spent much time with the leaders before that. Because their style of racing doesn't match Earnhardt's style of racing, I think he's on an island, and that makes him a little less attractive. That said, he spends more time with the leaders overall in the last couple of years, or spent more time with the leaders overall in the last couple of years than anyone else. He's not the Pied Piper any longer, but he's a good pick.
Yeah. All right, he is Dan Beaver, and you can follow him on Twitter at Fantasy Race. Read his fantasy NASCAR prediction or analysis at NASCAR.com and YahooSports.com. Dan, thanks again for your time this week. Wish we had more time to talk. Maybe next week we'll get you on 5 minutes earlier than rather than 5 minutes later because we enjoy it. And
I could fill up an hour.
All right. Yeah, well, you know what? You can have this seat if you want it.
Don't say that, Dan. Don't say that. Charlie's been looking to bail for years.
That's right. Dan, thanks a lot. Dan Beaver, you follow him on Twitter at Fantasy Race. All right, Steve-O, you're on the spot. Who are you picking for Talladega?
All right, I am going to take Tony Stewart.
Tony Stewart, I'm taking Jeff Gordon.
All
Just to
right.
make you look bad.
No problem. You can make me look bad all day long. Thanks to Ryan McGee from ESPN.